All right, music fans, welcome back. Harmless Dave here, talking real music in real time for a few real people out there just like you and just like me. Is the Brian Wilson slash Chicago tour, is this a case of elder abuse when it comes to Brian Wilson? A lot of people have been sending me messages like, hey Dave, this is painful. Why are they doing this? And the whole Chicago Beach Boys thing, it dates back to the 70s. And Beach Boys worked with Chicago at one point on the song Wishing You Were Here. Those are all the Beach Boys in the background. I'm not sure if Brian Wilson is actually on that, but the current Beach Boys lineup at the time, where Brian Wilson kind of revolved in and out of it, had stuff to do with it, but wasn't actually in it. Um, some of those albums that people forgot about, by the way, in the 70s, really, really great records, or at least contained a few really amazing songs. But mostly when people think of the Beach Boys, they're thinking of their 60s catalog more than anything else. And Brian Wilson is a musical genius. There's no way around it. He and McCartney are the same age. I think they're born like within a few days of each other, if I remember. And they both just turned 80 years old. And Brian Wilson is out there with Chicago. And, you read some of the reviews, and this is kind of the problem with people not admitting what's actually happening on stage. I've got eyewitness testimony. I've got videos that I've watched. But here's what one reviewer said. I wasn't sure what to expect from this set. I knew that due to Brian's age and health, the show may be a bit different than a typical concert, and it was. He sang bits and pieces of each song. When his voice trailed off, his bandmates and friends, even the crowd, lovingly picked up right where he left off. That was a touching thing to witness. Brian seemed so happy to be there on stage, even though his singing moments were brief, his voice was still recognizable. For others his age, that isn't the case. All right, so obviously this person is just really happy to see Brian Wilson. He says Brian Wilson is happy to see everybody else. Brian does this thing where he just blankly kind of stares off into space. And back in 1988, and I think I've told this story, I met Brian Wilson up at a Warner Brothers satellite facility up just north of Boston in a town called Woburn, Massachusetts. And it was me and the late, great Brad Martin, who was a legendary disc jockey and just a booming radio voice. Really nice guy, but super well respected. Spent decades in radio on Cape Cod and in other places. But he and I went up to meet Brian Wilson. This was the record label saying, hey, you've got this great opportunity. You never know, when Brian's going to be able to do this again. And, we're sitting there going, okay. And I think we drew the short straws or whatever. So we were like, yeah, we're going. Or is it the long straw? Well, we battled it out with other people in the radio station, and it ended up being Brian and I. And so I remember, I think Brian drove and we went up to this facility. It was kind of like a warehouse. It was kind of weird. And we get there and we're waiting around and we're doing small talk. And they literally wheel out Brian Wilson. He's in a wheelchair. And then a couple of guys actually help him to stand up out of the wheelchair. And Brian then reached out his hand. And I remember I got the dead fish handshake from Brian. Brian and Brad also exchanged the dead fish handshake. Clammy, whatever, however you want to describe it. That's the best way I can look. Yeah, it's a dead fish. Hi, Brian. How are you? Good to meet you. Awkward, unbelievably awkward. And I was much more socially troubled at the time. I didn't have as much life under my belt at the time. So I was just like starstruck, like it's Brian Wilson. But, he didn't talk. The people who were with him. And of course, if you read into all this stuff, uh, there was this one psychiatrist who became Brian's, spokesperson and pretty much took over the guy's career and everything in his life. And I'm not sure if that guy was there that day. He could have been. He probably was, and I just didn't know that much about the situation. But Brian had this album called Love and Mercy out there, and this is how they were promoting it. They were going around to different areas, and we were playing the title track at least, and maybe one or two other songs from the album. And the song was kind of mellow for us, but those were the days where, rock stations did play stuff that wasn't designed to make your ears bleed. And, we had a legacy audience. And so Brian Wilson fit in there. I wasn't completely blown away with the song or the album, but I decided to add the song to the playlist, and the record label obviously rewarded us with a trip to see Brian Wilson. Well, fast forward to today, and it's the same Brian Wilson that I met, even though he's much older. He kind of stares blankly into space. Here, he's singing parts of songs. He's not singing all of the song. In fact, it's weird because I've watched some of these videos and he'll sing and it looks like he's just getting started, like he's just cranking up, and then he just stops singing. And then, as mentioned here in this article, someone else takes over, whether it be someone else in his band. Robert Lamb calls them Brian's Boys instead of the Beach Boys. This is marketing, people. This is just marketing. It's Chicago and the Beach Boys, basically, or Chicago and Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys. And I'm not thrilled about it. I mean, I just don't think at this stage Brian should be out there. And I know he's done some things in recent years and they've been okay, but he's never been himself since probably the late 1960s, right? He had a nervous breakdown. A lot of people thought it was due to the pressure of trying to compete with the Beatles, and that might be true. A lot of people just, attribute the whole thing to substance abuse and his reclusive lifestyle and some of the things he was getting into at the time, some of the philosophies and things that were kind of infiltrating his world. All of the above, probably. It's kind of miraculous that he's made it to 80 when you think about it. And it's good. It's good that he's still around. He's still coherent. The audience is there to basically support Brian Wilson. And it's not, to be necessarily entertained by Brian Wilson. This is one of those moments where you're like, okay, there he is. He's on stage. And that's when we met Brian Wilson. That's kind of how we felt. We were like, okay, we met Brian Wilson. That's kind of a big deal, right? And, not too many people can say they just were hanging out, trying to have a conversation through these other people with Brian Wilson, a very awkward conversation. And I think the word awkward is appropriate today. I mean, this whole exercise, having Brian Wilson out there is rather awkward. But for some people, again, this reviewer, he's completely in love with this, thinks this is great. Brian's out there. He says his voice is better than a lot of people his age. That might be true, but he's not really singing all that much. And, he's not the Brian Wilson that created all those songs. He isn't the same guy. And, that guy left the building a long time ago. And maybe there was a way to bring him back, but a lot of people exploited Brian Wilson over the years. And I think in a way, they're still exploiting him. Hey, we can put him out there with Chicago. And if we can just get him through this, it'll be a great tour. You prop him up next to the piano and he just sits there. A lot of the time he just sits there. And it's very similar to when he was sitting in that wheelchair when we met him. Very similar. So in any event, I don't know, is it elder abuse? Some people say this is elder abuse. It's just sad. Why do this to Brian Wilson? It appears mostly about money, people. It's about, having these two bands on the same docket, and people will say, look, it's Chicago and Brian Wilson. And then maybe they're there mostly to see Chicago, and for a little bit of a bonus, they get to see Brian Wilson. And seeing Brian Wilson apparently is enough for the reviewer here and the fans that are helping Brian sing these songs. Is it touching? Is it nice? Yes. Is it awkward? Absolutely. So, in any event, that's my take on the Brian Wilson out with Chicago thing. I watched a few videos and it's uncomfortable. And it takes me back to 1988 when I'm in the same room, and it was very awkward and uncomfortable. And things haven't changed in over 30 years. They're kind of the same, except Brian's out there on tour and he's 80 years old. So that's the video. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for notifications, Patreon for just $1 a month. And yes, of course, we'll see you soon.